Jack's Recap. Today's biggest headlines in 15 minutes or less.
Most issues have kind of a critical mass point, meaning they have a point in which people no longer tolerate that particular issue. And just to point to the most recent example that I can think of, George Floyd. Most people in their minds, they had kind of made up how they felt about police brutality in the United States. Now, we could debate the merits of that argument all day, but the point is that the people who were protesting on behalf of George Floyd, they had reached a certain kind of critical mass. All the riots that we saw last summer, all the protests that we saw last summer, everything from Chaz Chop, all that kind of stuff. All of that was indicative, again, of this kind of critical mass, this boiling point that people get to. One of my primary concerns about COVID-19, whether it was lockdowns or rollbacks or restrictions or phase systems or whatever it was that eventually people would reach a critical mass with this issue. And I'm talking to the point where people would literally start just going out and committing crimes. And I think that we saw that with that group of men, that insane group of men that went out there and they tried to kidnap Gretchen Whitmer? They tried to go out there and they tried to kidnap her and her family. And they said, we're going to hold her hostage. You remember that story from many, many, many months ago. But when you restrict people, when you tell people that you have almost complete control over who they go see and where they go and how many people they can be around, at a certain point in time, people begin to push back. And there was a story that just broke today, says that there's a bunch of Democrats up in Olympia that are pushing back against Jay Inslee. He's receiving criticism from lawmakers in his own party after shifting economic reopening plan with a group of Pierce County Democrats threatening the possibility of a special legislative session following the governor's recent implementation of a pause that left their county stuck in a phase with tighter COVID-19 restrictions. This is exactly what I thought would happen. When you disproportionately affect one group over another, people reach a boiling point. It doesn't necessarily matter if it's factual or not. What matters is that people feel that way and that people perceive it to be that way. And I will tell you that for the fine people over in Pierce County, I completely understand why you would do this. I completely understand why you would be outraged on this issue. And the thing that I like about it even more is that they are saying, hey, we're going to do it through the legislative process. We're going to take you up on this. We might have a special session and we're just going to hammer it home. I like this kind of political movement, and I'll tell you why. Because it tells me that people's attitude around COVID-19 is changing. People who previously may have had these kinds of preconceptions about phase systems and rollbacks, their attitude is changing because they are seeing now the effects of capricious government. You know, I try to make it a point where I don't like to frame things necessarily in a Democrat or a Republican way. I like to try to frame things in a good policy, bad policy way, in a fascist way or in a freedom way. I like to frame things that way so that we understand what it might look like to live in a free state and to be able to make decisions for yourself. So before we get to that point, let me just go through this letter really quick. The letter sent this afternoon was signed by 8 Democrats in the House and Senate and 4 House Republicans. It comes the same day that the Washington Hospitality Association launched a petition to follow California's lead, my former state, and fully reopen the state on June 15th. Dozens of other states have already set plans to fully reopen their economies, including New York, New Jersey, which have set a May 19th goal. This is the thing that we all knew was coming. We all knew it. We've known it now for going on about 6 months. That as soon as the vaccines started rolling out and as soon as people started getting vaccinated en masse, there was no reason to continue this charade. There was no reason to continue this ruse, and we could all move on with our lives and be better for it. That's the most important thing about all of this, is be better for it. People have been vaccinated. People have been responsible, despite what other people might say. People have decided to be responsible with their families. And yet, what does Inslee do? It's kind of like, I don't know, kind of ambivalent. Like, maybe I'll pause. Like, maybe I'll do this kind of, sort of. I don't really know, like, because the metrics, and I had these rules, and they apply to Pierce County, but not King County. And I'm just kind of, sort of trying to fumble my way through this. People don't want that from their government. People don't want it from their government. And I'm really quite very pleased now that people are saying we have reached our critical mass point. We no longer want to put up with this system. I mean, I could have told you this. We could have had this all 6 months ago. We could have gotten back to our lives a long time ago. But thankfully, it's happening now. So they go on to say suspending any change in county status for 2 weeks, notwithstanding these metrics, changes a set of rules that have been consistently guided reopening decisions and protected the public over the last few months. They go on to say with an eye towards public health, public support, equity, and consistency, failure to do so will require us to consider asking our leadership to exercise the legislature's authority to call a special session and weigh legislative options. And I'll tell you this as well. I was going through the comments underneath this story on Reddit, and I'm looking at everybody talking about it. And someone brought up a really excellent point that for the entire time of COVID-19, all of these decisions should have been made by local leaders. Think about it. Think about how amazing that would have been if people in Pierce County could have made the decision as to how to best run their county, and people in King County could have made that decision, so on and so forth, instead of having all of the power localized in the hands of one man. We can see how damaging that is. And I don't care, it could be Jay Inslee, it could be Gavin Newsom, it could be Donald Trump, it could be Joe Biden. I don't care who it is. But when you put so much power and responsibility in one man or woman's hands, what do they do with it? I will submit to you that they often mess it up. They often cannot handle it. And this is why we have not only the democratic process, but we also have representatives. We have people who we have assigned to government to speak for us. People often say to me, they say, Jack Stine, why do you refer to Inslee as a fascist? How could you possibly refer to Jay Inslee as a fascist? The man's a Democrat. Well, I may be using the word a little liberally, but the intention is this, that when you concentrate all of the power into one position and then you go around and you tell everybody that you're doing it for their safety under quote unquote emergency powers, that is an appendage of fascism. When you go around and you say, I don't care what your elected officials say, I don't care the way that you want to run your county, I get to determine who rolls back when. Moreover, I get to determine if I'm going to pause said system. This is like complete and total top-down control. So you could come after me and say, oh, Jack Stine, Jay Inslee's not really a fascist, and I would say, yeah, sure. But understand that at least he has the presence or the essence of fascism when you go around and make these kinds of decisions for people. This whole thing, this whole issue, by the way, really should have been handled. I'm talking about COVID-19. We really should have been following the lead of the fine state of Florida. And here's why. We all know that Florida has I believe the second oldest population in the United States. They have the most people who are over the age of 65. I think the only state in front of them is Maine. Why is this important? Well, because we all know that COVID-19 disproportionately affects people who are over the age of 65. This is just a fact. It is just a statistical fact. And we all know that currently in the United States, something like less than 300 children have died under the age of 18 from COVID-19. So with all of this knowledge, we now know that we should have been protecting the elderly to the best of our ability, and that young people should have been able to go out and to live their lives. We all know this. And thankfully, Ron DeSantis decided to step up and say this. So about 3 days ago, he came out and he suspended all remaining COVID restrictions. He said, we are no longer in a state of emergency. Can you imagine Jay Inslee giving up that amount of power? Now, you can say to yourself, you can say, Jack Stine, I hate Ron DeSantis. I hate the Republicans. I don't like anything that they stand for. But at least Ron DeSantis is acknowledging that there is a time and a place to give up your emergency powers. There is a time and a place for government in which they are supposed to say, okay, I'm giving everybody their ability back to be a free citizen. That is something that needs to happen. You can still run around fearing COVID-19. You can still run around being deathly afraid of the idea that you might succumb to COVID-19. But you have to recognize, as I have been talking about this entire week, that there are people out there who are ready to get on with the rest of their lives, whether they've been vaccinated, whether they've already had COVID-19, or whether they just choose not to get vaccinated. And for you to be in support of someone who refuses to give up his emergency powers and who refuses to recognize that all of this is ending, all of this is basically over, what are you then in support of? Like, ask yourself that question. Just think about, what are you then in support of? It's kind of authoritarian, top-down control. You could say, well, Jack Stine, that sounds fairly harsh, don't you think? Well, I don't think that Jay Inslee is an authoritarian. Who made the decision to pause a rollback system put in place by himself that nobody got to vote on, that no representative got to weigh in on? Who made that decision? Recognize it wherever it happens. Again, it doesn't matter if it's a Democrat. It doesn't matter if it's a Republican. Just recognize when and where it happens and just call it out. That's all I ask from you. So signing the letter again were 9 Democratic representatives. Inslee has not given a time frame on when the state might reopen, citing the unpredictability of the virus. Currently in Washington, just 4 of the state's 39 counties are in more restrictive Phase 2. That's Cowlitz, Pierce, and Whitman were rolled back from Phase 3 last month, and Ferry County, where health officials decided to voluntarily do that. Now, if the fine people over in Ferry County want to do that based on their metrics, fine, this is all fine. But the whole process, this whole process that we live under right now, is that I take somebody from my district or my county or whatever it is, and I vote for them, and then they go to the state and they speak on my behalf. They speak on my behalf. And when you don't allow them to do that, yeah, this is what happens. You reach a critical mass. And Inslee should actually be very pleased that the fine people in the state of Washington have not done more. That they haven't just outright decided to ignore these ideas. Inslee should be really quite very pleased that the fine people in Washington have been so polite and so kind and so patient with all of these kinds of capricious orders. This really makes me think of, again, what we saw over the summer with the protests around George Floyd. That people had reached such a critical mass that they were willing to take it to the streets. They were so tired of seeing black men being killed in the streets, whether it was George Floyd or Eric Garner or Tamir Rice or any of these cases. And the country reacted to it, for better or for worse. I've been very critical of those protests. I've been very critical of those riots. I thought they were disgusting in so many ways. I don't think that's the way that we're supposed to handle these kinds of issues. The way that we're supposed to do this, again, is to have people who go out there and they put themselves on the front lines for us. Through the democratic process, through the representative process. And when you don't allow that, as Jay Inslee has not allowed that, what are you telling me? These are all things to consider as we move on forward past COVID-19. You know, at this point in time, I've actually been negotiating with my significant other as to when I'm going to go get the vaccine. And I've already decided that I'm going to go get it and when I'm going to go get it and all this other kind of stuff because I'm so tired of living this way. I'm so done living this way. I'm done with the weekly reports from Inslee. I'm done looking at the COVID-19 numbers. I'm done looking at the ticker count, the ticker death count that we see every single night on CNN or MSNBC. I'm done with it all. I'm done with debating people over the merits of lockdowns or rollbacks. I'm done debating with people over the effectiveness of masks and an N95 mask versus a regular disgusting cloth mask. I'm done with it all. And I'll tell you this, I think everybody's done with it. Republican or Democrat, I think everybody's done with it. I think anybody with 2 brain cells to rub together recognizes that this is all effectively over. That this is all effectively done with. So now I ask Jay Inslee, I make a plea to Jay Inslee to please recognize that you are in a position to do great good, as you have been for about the last week. You made a decision to pause the whole rollback thing. Great. That's a step in the right direction. Try to do something bold and brash and brave. Try to do something so unexpected that it would change the trajectory of your entire political career. Try giving up emergency powers. Try giving up this tremendous amount of power that you have taken for yourself. Try giving it back to the people. Try giving it back to representatives. Try giving it back to the legislative branch of government. Try giving it back there and see how people react, because I guarantee you that people will react well to it. Even people that despise you. People would say, okay, well, at least I can trust Inslee, in lieu of everything that's happened over the last year, to give up these powers and to no longer engage in this kind of fascist behavior. Again, you might be saying, Jack Stine, that's very, very strong language. Well, I'll tell you this. Inslee could come to me and he could prove to me that he's not an authoritarian fascist by making this decision. It's really quite very simple. This is not complex whatsoever. So I congratulate everybody. To wrap up the opening of the show, I congratulate everybody for making it through COVID-19. I really do congratulate you. If you've gotten to this point and you've survived and you got the vaccine or you've already had it, I sincerely congratulate you. And I look forward to a point where we can all go back out into the streets again. And we no longer have to do the mask thing and we no longer have to do the social distancing thing because it's right around the corner. It's right there. And right now, the person who gets to make that decision fundamentally is Jay Inslee. Right now, the ball is in his court, and I think he knows what the right thing to do is. We have to take a really quick break. You're listening to KIRO Nights.